They locked her wheelchair in place, so she couldn't move, couldn't look away. Right in front of her, her injured dog was being kicked again and again until it couldn't even stand. They laughed, because in their world, money erased consequences. But they missed one thing. Not the law, not the crowd. A U.S. Marine, already running toward them, and his canine had just made a decision. In the next few seconds, someone was about to lose control. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. The Texas heat hung low over Zilker Park, thick and unmoving, the kind that made every breath feel heavier than the last. Emily Carter sat quietly beneath the filtered shade of an old oak tree, her wheelchair angled slightly toward the fountain she was painting, her fingers steady but her shoulders carrying a quiet tension that never truly left her. At 29, Emily had a delicate, almost fragile appearance. Slim frame, pale skin touched by the sun, dark brown hair loosely tied back with strands escaping around her face, and deep hazel eyes that always seemed to be observing more than they revealed. There was a softness in her features, but not weakness. What remained in her expression was something harder now, something rebuilt. 2 years ago, she had been standing, walking, living a life that moved forward without hesitation, until one night on a dim roadside, she made the mistake of stopping to help a stranded woman, kneeling beside a broken-down car just as a speeding truck drifted across the line, its driver staring at a glowing phone instead of the road, and in the violent second that followed, everything below her waist was taken from her forever. Now she painted, because painting was the only place where she still felt whole, where control existed, where something could still be finished the way she intended. Beside her lay Buddy, a 3-year-old Labrador retriever with a golden coat that caught the sunlight, and soft, intelligent brown eyes that never strayed far from her, his body relaxed, but his attention constant, tuned to every shift in her breathing, every subtle change in her tone. He wasn't trained for combat or commands, he wasn't built for violence, but he knew her, knew when her hands trembled late at night, knew when silence became too loud, knew when to press closer without being asked. To anyone else, he was just a dog. To Emily, he was the reason the world still felt survivable. The moment broke without warning, not gradually, but violently, as the roar of an engine cut through the park like something out of place, sharp and aggressive against the calm. Emily's hand froze mid-stroke before she even turned, her body reacting first, instinct tightening her chest as a black convertible rolled to a stop nearby. Too loud, too deliberate, too confident for a place like this. 3 young men stepped out, each carrying the same air of entitlement but in different shapes. Logan Pierce leading, tall and lean with carefully styled blonde hair, sharp blue eyes, and the effortless arrogance of someone who had never been told no in his life. Tyler Reed following close behind, broader, heavier, his thick shoulders and slower expression marking him as the kind who followed orders rather than gave them. And Mason Cole lingering slightly to the side, thinner, restless, his eyes flickering with uncertainty that never quite turned into resistance. Their clothes were clean, expensive, untouched by anything real, and the way they walked made it clear they believed the space belonged to them the moment they entered it. Logan's gaze locked onto Buddy almost instantly, a smirk forming as if he had already decided what this moment would become. Tyler bent down, picking up a small twig and tossing it lazily toward the dog, his voice mocking, casual, like he was entertaining himself. "Fetch." Buddy didn't move, didn't react, only rising slowly and stepping forward until his body placed itself directly between Emily and the 3 men, not aggressive but firm, a quiet barrier. Emily felt her grip tighten around the brush, her voice calm but edged with warning as she told them to leave, that the dog wasn't for entertainment, that they needed to walk away. For a brief second, it seemed like nothing would happen. Then Logan stopped, turned, looked at her properly. And something inside him shifted from boredom to offense. "What did you say?" His voice dropped, no longer playful. Emily didn't look away, she repeated it. "Leave." That single word was enough. Logan stepped forward, too close now, invading the small space Emily controlled, and without needing to speak, Tyler and Mason moved in sync, each taking hold of one side of her wheelchair. The moment their hands locked onto the wheels, Emily felt the panic hit, sharp, immediate, physical, as she pushed forward instinctively, but the chair didn't move. It didn't even budge. "Let go of me," she snapped, her voice breaking through the heat. but there was no hesitation in them now, no uncertainty, just compliance. Buddy reacted instantly, a deep bark tearing from his chest as he lunged forward, but Logan was faster, his legs swinging with a brutal, practiced motion that connected hard with the dog's ribs. The sound that followed wasn't a bark, it was something smaller, strangled, cut short. Emily's breath vanished. "Stop!" she screamed, the word ripping out of her as she tried to push again, harder this time, her arms straining, muscles burning, but the chair was locked in place, held by hands that didn't care. Buddy stumbled, tried to stand, his legs shaking beneath him, and Logan didn't hesitate. Another kick, harder, sending him collapsing onto the grass. Everything inside Emily fractured in that moment, not just fear but something deeper, something that came from knowing she could do nothing, absolutely nothing, while it happened in front of her. Logan reached forward, grabbing a fistful of her hair and yanking her head back, forcing her to face him, his breath close, his voice low and cold as he told her to be quiet, and then the slap came, sharp and echoing, snapping her head to the side as heat exploded across her cheek. Her vision blurred, her ears rang, and through it all she could still hear Buddy trying to breathe, trying to move. "You're going to sit there," Logan said, forcing her to look again. "And you're going to watch." Buddy pushed himself up once more, trembling, loyal even now, and the next kick drove him back down, harder than before. Emily didn't scream this time. The sound that came out of her wasn't a word, wasn't even language. It was something raw, broken, pulled from a place that didn't know how to process what it was seeing. She couldn't move, couldn't reach him, couldn't stop it. All she could do was watch. And that was what broke her. 200 yards away, on the outer running path, a man slowed to a stop. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his body built with dense, functional strength, not for show, but for purpose. His dark shirt soaked through with sweat, clinging to a frame shaped by years of discipline and controlled violence. His name was Daniel Hayes, 38, a staff sergeant in the United States Marine Corps, with a short military haircut, light stubble lining a sharp jaw, and a faint scar above his right eyebrow that spoke of things he didn't explain. Beside him stood Rex, a 6-year-old German Shepherd K9, powerful, alert, his black and tan coat rigid with tension, eyes already fixed in the direction of the sound before Daniel even turned. The first thing they heard was the dog, the second was the woman. That was enough. Daniel didn't speak, didn't hesitate, his body already shifting forward as his gaze locked onto the source, Rex moving with him without command, silent, precise. In one motion, Daniel turned fully toward the park, his pace accelerating instantly, cutting across the grass instead of following the path, every step direct, controlled, fast. The distance between him and the scene began to close. And for the first time since it started, someone was coming. Someone who would not look away, and someone they had no idea they had just provoked. Daniel Hayes closed the distance fast, cutting straight across the open grass, his pace controlled but explosive. Every step placed with the kind of efficiency that came from years of training where hesitation meant death, not discomfort. From this angle, the scene sharpened instantly in his mind. One woman restrained in a wheelchair, 2 men holding her in place, one actively assaulting a dog on the ground. And something inside him shifted into a familiar state. Not anger, not panic, but cold, precise focus. At 38, Daniel carried himself like a man carved from experience rather than time. His broad shoulders relaxed but ready, his movements economical, his gray-blue eyes stripped of anything unnecessary the moment a threat presented itself. He had spent years in the Marine Corps learning how to read violence before it fully formed, and what he saw now wasn't confusion or accident. It was intent. Rex was already moving with him, a 6-year-old German Shepherd K9 trained in controlled response rather than blind aggression, his powerful frame low and aligned with Daniel's trajectory, ears forward, eyes locked, waiting for the exact signal that would determine whether he became a weapon or a shield. Unlike Buddy, Rex had been shaped by discipline, repetition, and exposure to chaos. His instincts sharpened rather than softened. But even so, he didn't lunge ahead. He stayed in sync, reading Daniel's body, trusting it. Tyler was the first to notice something was wrong, his laughter cutting short as a shadow moved too fast across his peripheral vision. But by the time he turned fully, Daniel was already there, closing the final step with no wasted motion. There was no warning, no shouted command. Daniel's arm slipped around Tyler's neck from behind, locking in tight, the choke applied with surgical precision, cutting off airflow and blood flow simultaneously, his forearm pressing just enough to overwhelm the nervous system without crushing the throat. Tyler's hands shot up instinctively, clawing at the arm, his body thrashing for less than 3 seconds before going limp, his knees buckling as Daniel released him at the exact moment consciousness faded, letting him collapse onto the grass without a sound. Mason reacted next, but too late and too poorly, his movements uncoordinated, driven by panic rather than decision, his body turning halfway toward Daniel just as Daniel stepped forward again, closing the gap in a single stride. Instead of a wide punch, Daniel drove a palm strike straight into Mason's solar plexus, the impact sharp and contained, forcing all the air out of his lungs in an instant. Mason doubled over, mouth open but silent, his body folding inward as if something inside him had been switched off. Daniel followed immediately, guiding him down with controlled pressure, preventing any erratic flailing, leaving him on his knees gasping for breath, completely removed from the fight without escalating the situation further. That left Logan. For the first time since stepping out of his car, Logan Pierce looked uncertain, the arrogance that had defined him moments ago cracking under something he didn't understand. He had expected resistance, maybe shouting, maybe panic, but not this. Not someone who moved without emotion, without hesitation, without noise. His eyes flicked between his two friends on the ground, and the man now standing between him and the woman he had just been dominating, and for a brief second, his mind stalled. Daniel didn't rush him. He took one slow step forward instead, his breathing steady, his gaze locked, and that was enough. Logan took a step back, then another. His confidence didn't shatter dramatically, it drained, quietly, like something leaking out of him that he couldn't stop. "We were just joking," he muttered, the words weak even as he said them, his voice betraying him. Daniel didn't raise his voice in response. "You're done," he said simply, his tone flat, controlled, leaving no space for argument. Logan swallowed hard, his eyes darting once more toward his unconscious and gasping friends before turning and moving quickly, too quickly, back toward the car. He didn't run at first, but the moment he reached the door, he yanked it open with shaking hands, scrambling inside as Mason stumbled after him, and Tyler remained unconscious on the grass until Mason dragged him in moments later. The engine roared back to life, louder this time, desperate, and within seconds the car peeled away from the curb, tires screeching against asphalt as it disappeared down the road. The park fell silent again. But this silence was different. Behind Daniel, Emily was shaking, her entire body trembling in small, uncontrollable movements as the adrenaline drained out of her system, her breath uneven, her eyes wide and unfocused. The red mark on her cheek had already begun to deepen, standing out against her pale skin, but she didn't seem to notice it. Her attention was locked on Buddy. Buddy was trying to move. That was enough to break Daniel's stillness. He turned immediately, dropping into a crouch beside the dog, his posture shifting completely, the tension in his shoulders releasing as his hands hovered just above Buddy's body before making contact, slow, deliberate, careful. "Easy," he said quietly, his voice no longer flat but grounded, controlled in a different way, meant to steady rather than command. Buddy flinched slightly at first, his breathing shallow, but when Daniel's hand settled against his side, firm but gentle, the resistance faded, replaced by a weak, trusting stillness. Daniel's fingers moved with practiced precision, pressing lightly along the ribcage, feeling for instability, for irregular movement, for signs of internal damage. Years in the field had taught him how to assess injuries quickly, how to act before help arrived. "You're a tough one," he murmured under his breath, more to the dog than anyone else, his thumb brushing once along Buddy's neck in a brief reassurance. Then he reached behind his back, pulling a compact medical pouch from his waistband, unzipping it with one hand and retrieving a compression wrap. Emily watched him, her mind struggling to catch up with what had just happened, her voice barely forming as she spoke. Is he going to be okay?" Daniel didn't look up immediately, focusing on stabilizing Buddy's torso, wrapping the bandage carefully but firmly to limit movement without restricting breathing. "He's hurt," he said, calm, direct, "ribs most likely, but he's breathing, that's good." He secured the wrap and finally lifted his gaze to her, meeting her eyes properly for the first time. There was no pity in his expression, just assessment. We need to get him to a vet, now." Emily nodded quickly, wiping at her face with the back of her hand, her fingers trembling. "My van, it's over there," she said, pointing weakly toward the street. Daniel rose in one smooth motion, then bent again, sliding his arms carefully beneath Buddy's body. Despite the dog's weight, he lifted him with controlled strength, adjusting his hold to minimize pressure on the injured side. Buddy let out a small pain sound but didn't resist, his head resting against Daniel's arm. Rex stayed close, circling once before positioning himself beside Emily, his body angled outward, scanning the surroundings, guarding without needing to be told. "Lead me," Daniel said. Emily pushed forward, her arms still unsteady but moving, guiding them toward the van. The distance felt longer than it was, her mind replaying the last few minutes in fractured pieces, but Daniel stayed behind her at a measured pace, matching her speed, not rushing, not crowding. When they reached the vehicle, he waited while she activated the ramp, then stepped up and gently placed Buddy inside on a folded blanket, adjusting him until he was as stable as possible. For a moment, everything paused. Emily turned her chair slightly, facing him. I don't even know how to thank you," she said, her voice quiet, still unsteady. Daniel shook his head once, dismissing it. "Don't," he replied. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, slightly worn notebook, tearing a page free and writing something quickly before handing it to her. "That's my number." She looked down at it, then back up at him. "If they come back," he continued, his voice steady, "or if anything feels off, you call me, doesn't matter what time." Emily tightened her grip on the paper, nodding. Daniel stepped back from the van, giving her space. Rex moved with him, silent, controlled, his eyes still alert but no longer tense. Emily took one last look at him before turning her chair and starting the engine, the van pulling away slowly, carrying her and Buddy toward whatever came next. Daniel remained where he was for a few seconds, watching until the vehicle disappeared from view, his expression unreadable. Then he turned and walked away. The night settled over Austin with a heavy stillness, the kind that made every small sound inside Emily Carter's studio feel amplified, as if the walls themselves were listening, as if silence had weight. Emily sat in her wheelchair near the low table by the window, her hands resting in her lap but never truly still, her fingers twitching slightly as if her body had not yet caught up with the fact that the immediate danger had passed. At 29, she had learned how to endure pain quietly, but what pressed on her now was not physical. It was something colder, something harder to name, a slow realization that what happened in the park had not ended there, that it had only changed form. Behind her, on a folded blanket, Buddy lay on his side, his golden coat dulled under the dim light, his breathing shallow but steady, his ribs wrapped tightly beneath a medical bandage. At 3 years old, he was young, strong, built for energy and play, not for enduring blunt force trauma, yet even now, injured and exhausted, his eyes followed Emily whenever she shifted, as if checking that she was still there, as if that mattered more than the pain in his own body. Earlier that evening, the diagnosis had been delivered with calm precision. 3 fractured ribs, severe bruising, but no internal bleeding. And logically, that should have been enough to bring relief. But relief never came clean. It always carried something else with it. And for Emily, it carried anger. Not loud, not explosive, but quiet and persistent, threading through every thought as she replayed the moment in the park, the hands on her wheels, the sound of impact, the way the world had narrowed to something she could not control. She had gone to the police because that was what you were supposed to do, because systems were supposed to exist for moments like that. But the moment Logan Pierce's name left her mouth, the air in that room had shifted, and she had felt it instantly. Officer Carl Benson had not raised his voice, had not dismissed her directly, but the change in his posture, the careful distance in his tone, the way his words slowed down as if stepping around something invisible, those details had told her more than anything he said out loud. He had filed the report, yes, but not with urgency, not with intent. And as she left that building, she had understood something she had never fully faced before. Truth did not always matter in the places where decisions were made. The phone call came less than an hour later, and it did not surprise her as much as it should have. Emily had been staring at the edge of her table, her thoughts looping in quiet circles, when her phone vibrated, the unknown number glowing on the screen for a moment before she answered. The voice on the other end introduced itself as Arthur Langford, legal counsel for the Pierce family, And even without seeing him, Emily could picture the kind of man he was. Late 50s, tall, posture straight from habit rather than effort, silver hair kept meticulously in place, clean-shaven face with sharp, controlled features. The kind of man who had spent decades in tailored suits, speaking in rooms where outcomes were decided before conversations even began. His voice carried no hesitation, no wasted words, each sentence measured, each pause intentional, and beneath that calm surface was something colder, something practiced, the confidence of a man who rarely needed to repeat himself. He called the incident a misunderstanding, not aggressively, not dismissively, but in a way that reframed it without asking permission, as if reality itself could be adjusted by tone alone. And when Emily pushed back, when she said clearly that it had not been a misunderstanding, he did not argue, he adapted. He offered to cover Buddy's medical expenses in full, framing it as generosity, as resolution, as something that could make everything easier if she simply agreed to sign a non-disclosure agreement, a standard document, he said, something that prevented unnecessary complications. The words were smooth, almost reasonable, and for a brief second, Emily understood how people agreed to things like that, how pressure could be disguised as help. But when she asked what would happen if she refused, the shift came, subtle but unmistakable. Langford did not raise his voice, did not threaten directly, but he began to outline consequences with the same calm precision: defamation, countersuits, witness statements that would contradict her version, a narrative that would paint Buddy as aggressive and her as unstable. And then, almost as an afterthought, he mentioned her landlord, a man named Harold Benson, a thin, aging property owner in his late 60s with sun-spotted skin, sparse gray hair, and the cautious demeanor of someone who had spent his life avoiding conflict rather than confronting it. A man whose small portfolio of rental properties depended heavily on business relationships he could not afford to lose. The implication did not need to be explained. If pressure was applied there, her studio, the one place she had rebuilt her life, could disappear just as quickly as her legs had. When the call ended, Emily did not move immediately, her hand still holding the phone as if letting go would make everything more real. Her breathing shallow again, her chest tightening in a way that had nothing to do with physical injury. She had faced pain before, faced loss before, but this was different. This was control being taken in a way she could not see, could not touch, could not fight the same way. For a long moment, she simply sat there, listening to Buddy's uneven breathing behind her, the quiet rise and fall grounding her just enough to keep from spiraling. Then her eyes shifted to the small piece of paper on the table, Daniel's number. She picked it up with fingers that were not steady and dialed before she could overthink it, before doubt could settle in and tell her to handle it alone. The call connected almost instantly, and when Daniel Hayes answered, his voice was exactly as she remembered, low, steady, alert, the kind of voice that did not need to ask for attention to receive it. She told him everything, not perfectly, not in order, but enough. The words coming faster than she intended, the edges of panic returning as she described the call, the threat, the way it had been delivered so calmly it felt inevitable. Daniel did not interrupt, did not fill the silence, but she could hear something change on his end, not in words but in presence, a shift from listening to deciding. When she finished, there was a brief pause, and then he asked one question. "Are you alone?" She said yes. "Lock the door," he replied immediately. "Don't open it for anyone but me. I'm coming." 10 minutes later, exactly as he said, there was a knock, 3 short, controlled taps that carried no urgency, but no hesitation either. Emily moved toward the door, her hands tightening slightly on the wheels as she approached, her body remembering what it felt like to be unable to move when it mattered, and for a split second, she hesitated before checking through the peephole. Daniel stood outside, no longer the runner from the park, but something more contained, dressed in dark jeans and a fitted shirt that emphasized the structure of his frame, his posture relaxed but ready, his eyes already scanning before she even opened the door. Beside him stood Rex, the German Shepherd K9, his body still, alert, his gaze moving constantly, assessing the hallway, the doorframe, the small details most people ignored. Daniel stepped inside the moment she unlocked the door, his presence filling the space without overwhelming it, his eyes moving quickly across the apartment, noting exits, windows, angles, distances, the habits of someone who had learned to map environments instinctively. "Anyone else been here?" he asked. Emily shook her head. "No." He nodded once, then moved to the windows, checking locks, testing frames, his hands quick but controlled, never rushed. From a compact bag he carried, he pulled out small devices, thin wire, reinforced tape, nothing complex, nothing high-tech, but practical, effective, the kind of tools that relied more on placement than sophistication. Within minutes, he had set up simple trip alarms along the main door and window entry points, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look, designed not to stop someone, but to give warning. "It's not permanent," he said, stepping back slightly, checking the tension of the wire with 2 fingers. "But if someone tries to get in, you'll know before they reach you." Emily watched him, her breathing slowly beginning to even out, not because the danger was gone, but because for the first time since the phone call, it felt like something was being done about it. Daniel didn't offer reassurance in words, didn't promise safety, but his actions carried something stronger than that. Structure, response, control. He glanced once toward Buddy, then back to Emily, his expression unchanged but his tone slightly softer. "They're pushing," he said. "That means they think you'll fold." Emily swallowed, her grip tightening again, but this time not from fear alone. "I won't," she said quietly. Daniel held her gaze for a second longer, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Good," he replied. And for the first time since the truth had started to twist around her, Emily felt like she wasn't facing it alone. The late afternoon light over Austin carried a strange stillness, warm but hollow, as if the city itself was unaware that something irreversible had already been set into motion inside a small studio tucked between brick walls and narrow streets. Emily Carter sat quietly in her wheelchair near the window, her posture slightly slumped, her hands resting loosely in her lap in a way that didn't suggest calm but exhaustion, the kind that settled deep after too much had happened too quickly. Behind her, Buddy lay on a folded blanket, his golden fur dulled under the soft light, his breathing steady but shallow, each rise of his chest measured, controlled, the bandage around his ribs a constant reminder of what had already been taken from him. Daniel Hayes stood near the far wall, his arms relaxed at his sides, his gaze moving slowly across the room, not looking for what was visible, but for what didn't belong, his presence quiet but deliberate, the kind of stillness that came from knowing that silence often hid movement. What Emily didn't know was that across the city, the situation had already shifted from humiliation to calculation, and Logan Pierce was no longer reacting, he was deciding. Inside a private office high above the river, Logan stood near the edge of a glass desk, his posture tense, his expression sharper than before, the easy arrogance that once defined him now replaced by something more volatile, something bruised and desperate to reassert control. He was 22, tall, clean-cut, his blonde hair styled with careless precision, his face handsome in the polished, predictable way wealth often shaped it. But beneath that surface was a temperament that had never learned restraint, a man who had grown up in a world where consequences were always redirected away from him. Across from him stood Arthur Langford, his legal advisor, a man in his late 50s with a tall, lean build, silver hair perfectly combed, his posture straight and composed, his voice calm in a way that carried more weight than volume ever could. A man who had spent decades managing situations exactly like this, not by fixing behavior, but by controlling outcomes. "You made it public," Langford said evenly, his hands resting lightly on the desk. "That was your mistake." Logan's jaw tightened. "He put his hands on me." Langford's eyes didn't change. "And now you're reacting emotionally again," he replied, "which is how you lose." That was when the plan became something else entirely. Less than an hour later, Logan stood in the alley behind Emily's studio with Tyler and Mason beside him, the narrow passage dim even in daylight, the air thick and quiet, the kind of place people passed without looking twice. Tyler, broader and heavier, carried tension in his shoulders but followed without question, while Mason lingered slightly behind, his lean frame restless, his movements quicker, his eyes scanning constantly as if still unsure how far this would go. "We shouldn't stay long," Mason muttered under his breath. Logan didn't respond, his focus already fixed on the steel service door ahead, a secondary entrance used for deliveries, functional but not reinforced. He stepped forward, testing the handle once before nodding slightly, and Mason moved in, sliding a thin card into the lock with practiced ease, the latch giving way after a few seconds of pressure. The door opened quietly. They stepped inside. The studio greeted them exactly as Emily had left it. Unfinished canvases leaning against the walls, brushes laid out with care, colors waiting mid-process, everything arranged with intention, with meaning. For a brief moment, even Tyler slowed, something in the space resisting what they had come to do. But Logan didn't hesitate, and that hesitation never had time to grow. He walked straight to the nearest canvas and drove his fist through it, the fabric tearing sharply, the sound cutting through the room like something final, something irreversible. That single act removed whatever restraint remained. Tyler grabbed an easel and slammed it against the ground, wood cracking under force, while Mason, his hesitation collapsing into motion, began knocking over paint jars, color spilling across the floor in thick, chaotic streaks that mixed and spread under their shoes. What followed wasn't random destruction, it was methodical. Finished paintings were slashed, frames snapped, tools crushed. Every piece of work that had taken time, effort, and meaning reduced to something broken within minutes. The room transforming from a place of creation into something violated, something stripped of identity. Logan moved last, stepping back slowly, his breathing heavier now, not from exertion but from satisfaction, his eyes scanning the damage with cold approval before reaching into his bag and pulling out a spray can. He shook it once, the sound sharp in the silence, then stepped toward the largest untouched wall and began to write, each stroke deliberate, each letter forming slowly and clearly. Next time it's the dog. The paint dripped as it settled, and then they left. When Emily returned less than 20 minutes later, the first thing she noticed wasn't the destruction. It was the smell, sharp and chemical, cutting through the air in a way that didn't belong. Her wheels slowed as she crossed the threshold, her eyes lifting gradually, taking in the overturned easels, the torn canvases, the colors smeared across the floor like something spilled beyond recovery. Her mind tried to process it as temporary, as something that could be fixed, but that illusion shattered the moment her gaze reached the wall. She stopped moving completely, her hands going still, her breathing shallow, her eyes locked on the message as everything inside her seemed to collapse inward at once. This wasn't just damage, it was erasure. Everything she had rebuilt after losing her legs, every piece of control she had fought to regain, gone in minutes, taken not because it mattered to them, but because it mattered to her. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just sat there, her body present but hollow, as if something essential had been removed without warning. When Daniel arrived minutes later, he didn't ask what happened. He saw it immediately, his eyes scanning the room once, taking in the pattern of destruction, the untouched alarm lines at the main entry, the positioning of the damage, the message on the wall. His expression didn't change dramatically, but something in his posture shifted, a tightening that came not from surprise, but recognition. He moved to the side entrance, examining the frame, the lock, the small details most people ignored, and then straightened slowly. They didn't come through the front, he said quietly. They knew where to avoid. Emily didn't respond, her gaze still fixed ahead, her silence heavier now, not empty, but shattered. Daniel turned back toward her, his eyes settling briefly on Buddy, then returning to the message on the wall, and in that moment, the situation clarified completely. This wasn't intimidation anymore. This was organized, deliberate, planned, and the escalation was already written out in front of them. "They're not done," he said, his voice lower now, colder, stripped of anything unnecessary. Emily blinked slowly, her focus beginning to return just enough to hear him, to process the words as they settled. He stepped closer, not rushing, not forcing movement, but grounding the moment. "They're coming for the dog," he continued, his tone firm, controlled, leaving no room for interpretation. That broke through. Emily's head turned slightly, her eyes finally shifting away from the wall to meet his, the emptiness still there but no longer complete. "We're not staying here," Daniel said, his voice steady, decisive, already moving past reaction into action. She swallowed, her hands tightening slightly on the wheels, something fragile but real beginning to return beneath the shock. "Pack what you need," he continued, his gaze holding hers just long enough to anchor the command. Nothing else. Because this was no longer about holding on to what had already been destroyed. It was about protecting what they could still lose, and somewhere across the city. Logan was already planning how to take it. The night wrapped around Austin like a quiet cover. The city lights dimmed by distance and shadow as Daniel Hayes stood just inside the ruined studio, the air still thick with the lingering scent of paint, solvent, and something harsher, intent. The space no longer resembled what Emily had built. It had been reduced to fragments, to broken frames and torn canvas. But to Daniel, it was no longer a home or a workspace. It was terrain, something to read, to control, to use. Earlier that evening, he had moved Emily and Buddy to a small roadside motel on the outskirts of the city, far enough from the downtown district to break any immediate pattern, the kind of place where anonymity came naturally, where no one asked questions if you paid in cash and kept to yourself. Emily had resisted at first, not with words but with silence, the kind that came from losing too much too quickly. But when Buddy had shifted painfully beside her, when she had seen the strain in his movement, she had nodded once and let Daniel take control of what came next. The motel itself was run by a woman named Rosa Delgado, a woman in her early 60s with a compact, sturdy build, dark hair streaked with gray pulled back into a tight bun, her face lined not with softness but with years of practical endurance, the kind of person who had seen enough trouble to recognize it without needing explanation. She spoke little, but her eyes were sharp, observant, and when Daniel paid in cash and asked for a room at the far end of the building, she didn't question it, only handed over the key with a small nod, her instincts telling her this was not curiosity's business. Inside the room, Emily had settled near the bed, her posture still fragile, her hands resting on Buddy's fur as if anchoring herself to something that hadn't been taken, while Daniel gave brief, direct instructions: lock the door, don't answer for anyone, keep the lights low, before leaving again without hesitation. Because the real fight wasn't there. It was waiting. Back at the studio, Daniel worked in silence, his movements controlled, deliberate, each action placed with purpose rather than urgency. He shut down the main power line from the breaker panel, plunging the space into darkness except for the faint glow leaking through the high windows. Then repositioned what remained of the room, not to restore it, but to reshape it. Broken furniture became cover, angles were adjusted, lines of sight reduced, and along the entry points, he replaced his earlier alarms with more refined triggers. Quieter, tighter, designed not to warn the intruder, but to inform him. Rex moved with him, the German shepherd silent, focused, his body low and fluid as he navigated the space, his amber eyes alert but controlled, waiting for direction rather than acting on impulse, a trained partner rather than a reactive animal. When everything was set, Daniel took position in the darkest corner of the room, his back against the wall, his breathing steady, his body still enough to disappear into the shadow. Across the city, Logan Pierce sat in the back seat of a black SUV, the interior dim, the air thick with anticipation and alcohol, his posture loose but restless, his fingers tapping lightly against his knee as if unable to stay still for long. Tyler sat in the front, heavier, quieter, his earlier confidence replaced by unease he couldn't fully hide, while Mason, thinner and more reactive, shifted constantly, his eyes flicking between Logan and the window, as if part of him still understood that they had already gone too far. Logan, however, had moved past hesitation entirely, his earlier humiliation reshaped into something colder, something sharper, his need to regain control overriding everything else. "We finish it tonight," he said, his voice low but certain. "The dog's the weak point." That was the plan, simple, cruel, and completely predictable. The SUV pulled into the alley just after midnight, the city quiet enough that even small sounds carried further than they should. Logan stepped out first, his movements slower now, more deliberate, as if trying to recreate control through precision, while Tyler and Mason followed, their earlier hesitation buried under the need to follow through. The service door stood where they had left it, the same vulnerable entry point, and Mason moved to it again, slipping the card into place, the lock giving way with a soft click that echoed slightly in the narrow space. They stepped inside, one after another, the darkness swallowing them completely. Inside, the studio was silent, too silent. Logan paused for a fraction of a second, something in the stillness pressing against him, but pride pushed him forward before instinct could take hold. "Find it," he said quietly, pulling out his phone and switching on the flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness in a narrow line. Tyler did the same, his light shaking slightly as it moved across the broken room, while Mason hesitated a step behind, his breathing quicker now, the earlier confidence gone. That was their mistake. Light, movement, noise. Daniel moved first, not fast, not loud, but precise, stepping into the edge of Mason's path before the younger man could react, his hand striking cleanly at the side of Mason's neck, a controlled, practiced blow that shut down resistance instantly. Mason dropped without a sound, his phone slipping from his hand, the light rolling across the floor before settling. Daniel caught it before it fully dimmed, dragging Mason's body into the shadow and securing his wrists with a tight restraint, removing him from the situation before the others even realized he was gone. "Where'd he go?" Tyler whispered, his voice tightening, his light flicking back and forth across the room. Daniel didn't answer. He moved again, this time toward Tyler, using the broken furniture as cover, closing the distance without drawing attention, then striking from the side, his grip locking onto Tyler's arm before twisting sharply, forcing the larger man off balance and down to the ground with controlled force. Tyler struggled for a second, instinctive, but Daniel's weight and leverage ended it quickly, the fight gone as fast as it had started. Within seconds, Tyler was restrained, his breathing heavy, his earlier confidence completely gone. Now there was only Logan, standing alone in the dark. The realization hit him slowly, then all at once, his light swinging wildly as his breathing picked up, his earlier control collapsing into something far less stable. "Show yourself," he snapped, but the edge in his voice betrayed him, the command lacking authority now that he no longer believed it. The lights came on all at once, bright, blinding. Logan turned, his eyes struggling to adjust, and when they did, he saw them. Tyler and Mason on the ground, restrained, and Daniel standing a few feet away, still, composed, his presence unchanged from the park, but heavier now, more final. Logan's hand tightened around a broken piece of wood he had picked up without thinking, his body reacting before his mind caught up, and he lunged forward in a desperate, uncoordinated attack. Daniel stepped in, not back, deflecting the swing with minimal effort before locking onto Logan's wrist and twisting sharply, the movement precise, controlled, ending the fight in a single motion as Logan dropped, his breath knocked out, his resistance collapsing instantly. Silence returned, but this time, it held control. Daniel stepped back, pulling out his phone and dialing without hesitation, his voice steady as he reported a break-in, 3 individuals, forced entry through the service door, assault attempted. When the police arrived minutes later, they found exactly what the situation required: forced entry, restrained suspects, visible damage, and a witness who had acted within clear self-defense. This time, there was no room for interpretation, no space for influence to rewrite what had already been established. By morning, the story had shifted. Logan Pierce was no longer untouchable. Back at the motel, Emily sat beside Buddy, her hand resting gently against his side as he slept more peacefully now, his breathing stronger, his body beginning to recover. When Daniel returned, his shirt marked by the night but his posture unchanged, she looked at him differently than before, not with fear, not even with uncertainty, but with something quieter, something steadier. She had lost everything she had built in that studio, every painting, every piece of work, but sitting there, with Buddy still alive beside her and Daniel standing in the doorway, she realized something that mattered more than anything that had been taken. She hadn't lost herself. And for the first time since the accident, she didn't feel alone anymore. Sometimes miracles don't come as something extraordinary. They come quietly, through people who choose to stand up when others walk away. And maybe that's how God works in our lives, placing the right person in the right moment when we need it most. What happened here is a reminder that even in darkness, goodness still exists. And every day we are given a choice to be part of that light in someone else's life. If this story touched you, share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what you think. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us what truly matters. May God bless you and your family, protect you from harm, and guide you through whatever you're facing.